Hey, it's Dave Brown here, host of Now with Dave Brown on AMI. Check out this latest highlight from the show. Welcome back. It's Now with Dave Brown on AMI. We are live at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in Winnipeg, Manitoba for National Indigenous Peoples Day. Earlier this week, I had the opportunity to catch up with Jesse Boiteau, the Senior Archivist at the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation. I again want to give you a brief description of where Jesse and I did that interview. We were in front of a very large, tall, circular wooden structure called the Theatre Basket. Let's roll that tape. Hey, Jesse, thank you for making time to be with us today. We're grateful.
Not a problem.
So, the best place to start for us is to understand a little bit about the center, the work that you do, your core purpose, and how you got started.
Sure. So at the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, we opened in the fall of 2014. We had a soft launch, and we came out of the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement as part of the TRC's, or the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's mandate. We were to house and preserve the history and legacy of the residential school system in Canada. So that's how we started off, and then we began to evolve and add additional team members to meet the demands of and the needs of survivors and Indigenous communities across the country, as well as educators and researchers as well. So that sort of ties into part of our mandate to make available and accessible the records related to the residential schools in Canada.
The legacy of residential schools has always been an important topic, but it's really come into focus in the last 13 months after the discovery of the remains at Tecumloops Secwepemc. I'm curious how the last year has influenced the work that you and your colleagues are doing.
Yeah, it's changed everything for everyone. I would say it's changed everything for all Canadians. It's changed everything for us in terms of how we focus our resources, our time, and sort of shifting away from solely focused on providing access to individuals, to survivors, to providing access to information and records at the community level. That has been the biggest change for us, because it adds an additional layer that wasn't there before. So it's a lot of learning and growing as we go, as we work to develop these relationships with communities. And it's going to be an ongoing process as those relationships continue to develop.
Have you been able to get access to more documents, more stories, more of that information that we need to tell the whole story?
We have, luckily, and a lot of this work does ultimately go back to the children from Tecumloops. As I mentioned earlier, everything has changed, including government and religious archives' willingness to open up their collections and allow us to dive in further. Because when the TRC collected records from 2010 to about 2015, there were certain restrictions on what they could gain access to. But now, as you alluded to, the legacies of the residential school system are so important to understand now. And what that does is it opens up a lot of interconnectedness with not only the legacies, but also the records that were created regarding those legacies.
Now that we're starting to get more of that hard evidence, what does it suggest about the numbers of families and children and people that were impacted by the legacy of the system?
Yeah, like there are certain numbers that we will never get sort of a hard final number on. One of them being, the children that passed away at residential school, but also the families that were left behind. So now that we're focusing not just on the schools themselves, but the institutions around the schools, and understanding the impacts that they have had on families today, and impacts they'll have on future generations. It's opening up a lot of avenues for community-led research into this as well. So it's not just the NCTR or academic institutions leading the research, it's the communities who are trying to better understand the impacts of the residential schools.
The trauma is real.
Yeah.
For the survivors, for the families, intergenerationally, there's a significant trauma. And even talking about things, these events, it's important, but we also know it's difficult. Is that reflected in the stories that people are telling you and the interactions that you're having with people, having these conversations about their experiences? Are they experiencing that trauma in the conversations they're having with you?
Yeah, it's different from community to community, from one survivor to the next. There are some communities who are obviously they are feeling what is going on, but they understand that they need to continue this research to memorialize those children that never came home and to provide answers to the families of those children as well. So, there are many different people who are in different parts of their healing journey. That's another big takeaway over this past year as well. And that at the time that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was taking and gathering statements and stories from survivors, there were some who weren't ready to share at that time. But now with everything going on, there's, people are now ready to share as well. So there's that as well.
You mentioned before that the last year has galvanized certainly levels of government trying to be more transparent with the documentation and records that they do have. We also know there's an expectation for various religious leaders, including the Pope, to be coming to the country and offering apologies. What's the significance of those institutions offering some more transparency?
Yeah, there's different actions that are obviously more significant, but again, it's different levels of significance for different people as well. So take the Pope visit, for example. Some will take that as a really important step in acknowledging the harms that were done in the past by the Catholic Church, whereas others don't put a lot of stake into it unless there's actual action attached to those words. So it really depends on who you're talking to, whether or not it's a significant step.
Speaking of the people that you are going to be talking to, how can people either learn more about the center, but if they are a survivor and haven't shared their story or would like to share their story again, how are they able to reach out and get in touch with you?
Yeah, so there's a number of different ways. They can pick up the phone, they can give us a call, they could send us an email. We have a very active Facebook and Twitter page. We have a lot of survivors that will reach out through Facebook because that's where a lot of survivors are coming together to meet and reconnect with some of the other survivors that they went to school with. So that's been a really strong platform for us for reaching out to individuals who are across the country, who might be in other countries as well. So that's just another way for individuals to reach out.
And Jesse, forgive me, I probably should have started the conversation here or brought this up earlier, but how can the public at large learn more about the work you do and look at some of the materials that you are providing?
Sure, yeah, so probably the best way to start is to go to our website, nctr.ca, and then from there we have different pages based on who you are, whether you're an educator, whether you're a researcher, an academic, member of the general public. There are different avenues to get into the records based on where you're coming from. And then we have an extensive education resource base as well. So for teachers who are looking to get this content into the classrooms, which is a really important part of our mandate as well, being education. There are resources there as well.
Yeah, I've told the story a couple times on the air over the course of the last year where so much of the history classes that I was being taught, there certainly was a conversation about the Indigenous experience in Canada, but it was so much about the points of initial contact, right? When settlers were coming over. And there wasn't the really important conversations about some of the more modern injustices. So have you found in the last year, as this conversation has been galvanized, that educators are taking that time to reach out to say, we need these tools to give kids and everyone a more complete picture of a history of injustice?
For sure. Yeah, that's like over the past 12 or 13 months, as you said, we have had a large increase in requests from survivors and communities for access to records, but we've also seen a large increase in demand for education presentations to classrooms, both elementary and university, as well as corporate bodies and various levels of government just wanting to learn firsthand from our expertise on the history of residential schools. So there's certainly been an uptick there, and from what you read online as well, there's definitely a lot more attention, and people are starting to listen now.
Jesse, thank you for taking the time to be with us today, and thank you to you and your colleagues for the work that you're doing.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
That was Jesse Boiteau, the Senior Archivist at the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. To learn more, you can visit nctr.ca. That's nctr.ca. And as I mentioned to you earlier in the show, if you or anyone you know is experiencing pain or distress as a result of their residential school experience, you can contact the Residential School Survivor Support Line, which is available 24 hours a day. That number is 1-866-925-4419. That's 1-866-925-4419. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI TV or download the podcasts wherever you listen. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI TV or download the podcasts wherever you listen.